Hey everybody, how are we doing? So look, I am way under the weather. I am literally laying in bed with a laptop on me, but I said I got to do this, and I'm furious with myself because I got through 2.10, and I looked at the bottom and realized I wasn't recording it. So I'm a little upset at myself right now. I'm gonna go through it though the best I can. Again, it's not my normal self, so I apologize for the microphone, and everything. I'm literally laying in bed, but I got to do this because we do matter, and May 11th is right around the corner. So let's move with this. Today, I'll keep it a little more simple, kind of show you some evidence. We'll work through it. The judicial branch, so we do know that's the third branch in it. Again, it doesn't matter what level, because there is no level. They're all supposed to be the balance of power equal. They keep each other checked and balanced all the time in that one. So today we're going to look at 2.8 through 2.11, and we're really going to focus on the judicial branch, in particular the Supreme Court. Okay. As we go down, we see here the main enduring understanding is the design of the judicial branch protects the Supreme Court's independence as a branch of government, and the emergence and use of judicial review remains a powerful judicial practice. Okay, so first thing we read from that is that Supreme Court is an independent body, so it is not supposed to be tampered with or framed, pushed on by the president, other people, stuff like that. It's its own entity that exists on its own, so that way it stays impartial. Very important for you to know on that one. Impartiality is the number one thing the Supreme Court has to keep going. We kind of got that sense when we went to the courtroom this last year, but it's even more to the higher degree at the Supreme Court level. The emergence of judicial review. Also, we're going to get into that later, but judicial review, in a nutshell, basically is making a decision whether things are constitutional or not, and it's based on interpretations. So as we move forward down here, or go down more, sorry, again, my head's everywhere. Explain the principle of judicial review and how it checks the power of other institutions and state government. Awesome. But first, we need to see where it came from. So it did come from Article 3 of the Constitution, Sections 1 and 2. It's very important to remember that this is the part of the Constitution that gives the power to the Chief Justices of the Supreme Court here. So Section 1 talks about good behavior in the appointment. And then at the bottom, Section 2 really talks about what, in terms of ability, they have authority wise. So controversy between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, and so forth. So you can read the text here and kind of see what it really is. But again, that's where it comes from in that. Federalist number 78 does inspire that, so you might want to look at that in case you want evidence, but this is where it comes from at this point. Now, one of the specific cases that you've probably heard about or you've heard people talk quickly is Marbury versus Madison. Okay, it was founded in 1803, or is when the verdict came down. But if you look, I think this is something I didn't talk about before. Constitution is ratified on June 21st, 1788. Marbury versus Madison comes in 1803. So very, very interesting there. Marbury versus Madison basically established the principle of judicial review. So before this, judicial review was not there. So it's very interesting to note that even when we made our Constitution, the document, the living, breathing entity of us as Americans, still wasn't perfect. It still took court cases to be able to perfect it. And this is where Chief Justice John Marshall really gets his name, is Marbury versus Madison. So I would look at that, but I would know that it was not perfect. So from 1788 to 1803, there was no judicial review, meaning the Constitution was what the Constitution says. That's it. Where after judicial review comes about, it gets more interpreted, where implied meaning gets looked at and so forth as we go through. But that is definitely a case you gotta know, gotta look at. So watch the YouTube video on it. Carrie Lamonti does a good job at explaining it, but it's something I really think you need to wrestle with on that one. Topic 2.9 talks about the legitimacy of the judicial branch. So if we move forward on this one, we're really same thing. We're explaining how the exercise of judicial review with life tenure can lead to debate about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court's power. It's something we will hit in a second here, talking about why, like if you're in power, how does it change it? But I think one of the big ones, legitimacy, is the ideological changes that happen all the time within the Supreme Court. People change, entities change, meaning presidents change, right? Their administration changes, so policies change. But then the Supreme Court is staying the same if you think about it, because there is life tenure as an informal requisite that does happen. So you're not seeing chief justices change a lot. So when, for example, President Trump had the opportunity to appoint a chief justice, he didn't have to, but he definitely wanted to, because he wanted another conservative justice like-minded individual making judicial review judgments, whatnot, in the future, well lasting past his presidency of 8 years, assuming he gets reelected. Right. So there's this ideological battle always going back and forth between between the presidential appointments and the existing presidents rejecting whatnot. So just do know that it's not this perfect science in this one. One of the great cases that I think to look at in this one, again, over here, is United States versus Nixon. So if we do remember President Nixon with Watergate, bad, 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 bad. First president to actually be impeached like that in that disgraceful manner from doing something. So what happened? The court did reach a decision. Grand jury, though, indicted 7 Nixon aides with Watergate in this one. And President Nixon really argued right here the concept of executive privilege, meaning, immunity for that much, gave him the power to withhold sensitive information such as tapes from government branches in order to maintain confidential communications within the executive branch and to secure the national interest. President Trump has cited this a few times that you do have executive privilege. A lot of times they do grant it, meaning, yeah, you know what, it's for the national interest here. We can't let it come out. So Nixon argued that, and on July 24th, 1974, unanimous court ruled against it and said, no, President Nixon didn't have an absolute unqualified privilege to withhold information. So let me get this very clear. United States versus Nixon did not impeach President Nixon. It was the case that really led to it being a slam dunk, like, okay, the evidence has to come out, and sorry, you're implied in it, so you're going to have to deal with it. So that's really something, it's a great piece of evidence to use in terms of, that you're not, basically, president is not God in that one, and it does give legitimacy to the judicial branch in that sense. The second portent here, it talks about, life tenure. Should we restructure the Supreme Court? If we go down and we look at this, it does say, in recent campaigns, both parties have made selecting federal judges a top issue. You think about it. So 2020 could be different. President Trump really pushed hard with Brett Kavanaugh, even with the Me Too movement and the stuff that came out. He wanted to make sure that he was in there ready to go in that one on it. I do like this down here. Congress hasn't changed the court size. 9 justices since the mid 19th century. Yep. So the justices, like about half, have tenure during what the Constitution calls good behavior. So if we go back to Section 1 of Article 3, this is where it implies here. So it does not say in Section 1 here that they get to serve for life. It says shall hold their offices during good behavior. So the implied assumption is that assuming you have good behavior, you can theoretically stay until you die or you remove yourself. So that's where, so be very careful. The Constitution does not say life tenure, but the Constitution does grant good behavior ability to where there's no real removal powers unless you do obviously certain things contrary to good behavior and so forth. Very good in that one. But it is an ongoing debate. Should justices have tenure for life? Should they? I don't know. I love Ruth Ginsburg, Ada Ginsburg, I really do, but man, she's old, and I wonder if, as you get older, if it squashes your time in terms of your ability to make quality decisions. I don't know. I've met some brilliant 90-year-olds. I've met some really dumb 30-year-olds, and vice versa. So it's an interesting debate to have, but it is something you could bring up if you really wanted to in that one. Topic 2.10, the court in action. So here we're learning the same thing, that the Supreme Court is independent, whatnot. Judicial review comes about. So we really want to explain how the exercise here of judicial review in conjunction leads to debate, blah, 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 all that stuff. Judicial review here, I can't stress that enough. This is very important to know in this one. Judicial review is the idea fundamental to our system. The actions of the executive and legislative branch of governments are subject to review and possible invalidation by the judiciary. So what that means is that they are basically saying actions are either constitutional or not constitutional. They're not saying they're right or wrong. That's not what it's saying. It's saying, though, what its interpretation is with the Constitution. Does it hold up or not? The text of the Constitution does not contain a specific provision for the power of judicial review. So it was something, like we said, that in Article 3 and Article 4 has come about. So it's something that I really always like to go back to and say, man, we created this nation. We always claim it's perfect when we started, but even when we started and we had our amazing document, we're ready to go, it still wasn't perfect. And I think that goes back to the whole presumption in Unit 1 that we're a growing republic, we're a growing entity all the time, so things change. So we can't always say, the concept of make America great again. That's a tough one because you're assuming that America was great, where America is always evolving, right? And no offense, if Cornell Law School agrees with me, then I think I'm good to go. But that's funny on that one. Um, and down here again, we do talk more about who says Supreme Court justice should get life tenure. So, a good deal of the uproar of the confirmation stems from the expectation that he will remain for multiple decades. So again, we constantly go back to that and look at it. We've only had one Chief Justice impeached, Samuel Chase in 1803. That's it. There hasn't been that many. So unless you commit a crime or other impeachable offense, you really are there. And impeachable offense not always is infidelity. So even cheating might not get that. We learned that lesson too with President Clinton. So there are some things that it's just how you would think about it. So if this is an argumentative essay one for you to look at, I think it would be something to really look at the controversy between life tenure and what that does to judicial review in terms of either elongating a particular ideological one or does it change it, whatnot. Almost done, guys. Hang with me. So 2.11 checks on the judicial branch here. So let's go with this. Let me get myself set up here. Awesome. Cool. Okay, where do I start? Because I like this one. This one's probably my most favorite part of the judicial. Looking at it. Yeah, we'll look at that one. No, what is it? Okay, I like this. Political discussion about the Supreme Court's power is illustrated by the ongoing debate over judicial activism versus judicial restraint. Okay, so first off, in our pyramid, we have judicial review. We know that, and judicial review is, again, making things whether they're constitutional or not. So that's what they're really going about. There are two things within that in terms of how the Constitution should be interpreted. The first one is judicial restraint. This is a strict constructionist view that means judges are bound by wording, apologize, are bound by wording of the Constitution, meaning verbatim what the Constitution says. That's what judges' viewpoint sticks to. It's very linear. There's no differentiation. It is what it is, and you interpret it based off that viewpoint. So that is judicial restraint. Judicial activism is a loose constructionist view that says judges should look at the underlying principles of Constitution. So, for example, this is where we get in that debate in terms of life tenure for Supreme Court justices. Because if we go back here and we look explicitly, if I'm taking an explicit look here, there is nothing in here that says life, but there is shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at stated times receive. Okay, it doesn't say anything about removal. And theoretically, as long as you have good behavior, then you can stay in. That's a very activist way to look at it. A restraint would be, judicial restraint view is that, whoa, there's nothing in there that says, it just says good behavior. It doesn't say anything about life. So there's different ways to interpret it. So political discussions really are illustrated by the two different interpretations of the Constitution. You need to know it is judicial restraint and judicial activism. One is very strict, one is very activist and very loose. Got to know that moving forward. Very, very big thing in that one. Restrictions are also represented by different viewpoints looking at it. Congressional legislation to modify, impact, yep. Constitutional amendments, legislation impacting court jurisdiction, all this stuff. When you really, really think about it, and why I like looking at this stuff in the last one here, we've all heard of Dred Scott versus Sanford. We've heard of slavery, obviously. But here's kind of the thing I would, if there's a few cases for you to remember in this, that would be a really good piece of evidence. There's obviously hundreds you could look at, but some of the big ones are Marbury versus Madison, Dred Scott, Sanford, Nixon, U.S. This is a big daddy. So this is the first time the U.S. Supreme Court stated that slaves were not citizens of the United States and therefore could not expect any protection from the federal government or the courts. There is some theoretical assumptions that in 1857, because of Dred Scott versus Sanford, this really paves the way for the Civil War to open up fully, right? Because it legitimizes and says that, hey, even a slave that the master dies, you are a slave, so you don't get your freedom, right? In essence, in this one, and it all stems from in 1846, Dred Scott and his wife sued for their freedom in a St. Louis city court. The odds were in their favor. Yep, they had lived with the owner, Army surgeon, free territory of Wisconsin. So then they were looking for it and basically flipped on it. But again, this is the ideological look in terms of the way chief justices will interpret it. So we're not necessarily saying that this was a correct, moral, right decision, but this was a constitutional decision that was made, interpreted through a viewpoint. So that's really it in that one. There's a lot more to look at in all this stuff. So again, please look, watch the videos. Kerry Lamanna, they are very, very good, and I think you will learn a lot through them. This is kind of a nice nutshell for you to get yourself set in that point. But again, if I can leave you with one overarching thing, it's that the Supreme Court is independent and it needs to stay independent, because if it does not, then that checks and balance, that sharing of power really becomes skewed. So you want to stick around the principle that we need an independent Supreme Court for the reasons that we have to have our constitutionality. When we're looking at it, we can't let it be tainted. We can't let it be politicized. It has to be acting on its own. Okay. Watch the videos. Good luck with it. And I will see you guys tomorrow, hopefully feeling 10 times better. Take care, guys.